Hey, what's going on, YouTube? It's Falsa, and today I thought we'd talk about the Springwardens and the issues they're facing and maybe how to improve them. I switched to the Springwardens in Season 3, that's when Frondel came out, mostly because I wanted to play Flying Cav. I found it very fun. I heavily invested into Flying Cav, maxed them out, made them as strong as I could. And I played them from Season 3 up to and including Season 11. There was one random season in there when I switched over to League of Order, but otherwise, all those seasons I was playing with Eagles, playing with the Springwarden faction. But this last season I switched back to League of Order, and I'm sticking with League of Order. And people ask me, hey, why'd you do that? Well, the answer is, the Springwarden faction just doesn't keep up anymore. They're not competitive. They have some unique gameplay styles, but if you want to make an impact on the battlefield, they're really not the way you should go later in the game. So I thought today we'd talk about, the problems that the Springwarden faction is facing and some of the ideas and how to correct them. All the time, new players will come to me and ask me for advice, and one of the common questions, what faction should I choose? And the answer to that question always depends on what troop type are you focusing? Are you an infantry player? Are you a mage player, an archer player, etc.? All right, so a lot of them say mage players, and whenever you say mage players, the answer is very obvious, right? Because the League of Order is your magic faction, because they've got Celestials, and Celestials are awesome. There's just not enough commanders to make a lot of flying legions. You could basically put 2 flying legions out right now. Right now what I do is I go with Bert paired with Bayhorn, right? And that's sort of my more skill damaged flying legion. And then I do a Thea Atheist March, right? Because those two actually have a lot of synergy together, and they're a very good pair. They're more sustained focused, and a lot of their skills work well in conjunction, right? So those are 2 good marches, but that's really all you can do. But the reason that the League of Order is so good for flying marches is that you can just use your Celestials as ground troops, right? There's nothing that says these guys have to fly. And so you can put them with your ground magic marches. And the awesome thing about Celestials is that they are stronger than your Tier 5 Vestals or your Tier 5 Satyrs or Longleaf Treants or whatever. These are the best magic troops, and so if you are a mage main, you want to unlock T5 Celestials as soon as you can. Hey, no kidding, unlock T5. Everyone wants to do that. But then for mage mains, you want to just... These are the troops you focus, right? Now, sometimes people say to me, hey, I'm a infantry main. What should I choose? That's pretty easy. Infantry is all the same. All the skills that infantry have are exactly identical across the factions. The only thing that's different is each of them have a little bit of a different engineering buff. Basically, human infantry build better, orc infantry destroy better, and then elf infantry have a lesser buff for both destruction and building. So, okay, whatever, that's trivial to begin with. But as we know, engineering's kind of a sham in this game anyway, so this just does not matter. And then all the other skills, they're exactly the same. So if you're an infantry main, there's no difference. Now look, the global bonuses are different. You'd probably say that the orc bonus of 3% physical attack is probably the best here, maybe better than the human's magic defense. And then the elves have a little bit of movement speed and elixir recovery. It's all extremely close. I wouldn't worry about it. If you're an infantry main, they're all fine. You can pick any faction. Okay, so what about archers? Well, when people come to me and say they want to be archer mains, first I try and talk them out of it. But if I can't do that, I tell them to play Wilderburg, because Wilderburg is the archer faction. Spearmen are actually the best archers in the game right now. And the reason they're the best, archers in the game here is they have the best, passive bonus here. This is clearly the best of any of the 3 marksman units. And on the top of that, their global bonus just works the best with archers. Now, it's not exactly the same thing when it comes to their flying units. Unlike Celestials, which are better than Vestals or Satyrs or Longleaf Treants, Wyvern Riders are actually inferior to the Orc Spearmen. So, okay, these aren't as great, but it's still an additional factory, additional troops to pump out. So if you were an archer main, you should concentrate Spearmen, but let your Wyvern Rider factory run, essentially. It'll give you better sustain, allow you to stay in the fight longer. If you're playing archers, this is the best option you have. Okay, so if we play the League of Order, if we want to play mages, and we play Wilderburg if we want to play archers, surely that must mean we want to play the Springwardens if we want to play Cav. They're the Cav faction, right? Sadly, the answer to this is no. When people tell me they want to be a Cav main and ask what faction they should play, the answer is literally anything but the Springwardens. All right, with Springwarden Cav, you really have three options. You can play Elk Riders, or you can play Flying Eagles, or you can play Grounded Eagles. You have three choices, and none of them are great. Really, you play Springwardens if you want to play one of the niche sub-Cav factions, and just neither of those sub-factions work very well. The main Cav faction works great, but if you want to play the main Cav faction, you play Wilderburg or League of Order. Right, and this is the main problem, the fundamental problem with Springwardens. It's intended to be the Cav faction, but it is literally the worst choice if you are a Cav main. So the Cav faction just can't support the main Cav play. Alright, let's talk about why all the sub-Cav factions, that's Flying Eagles or that's Elk Riders, just don't work well in the game anymore today. And we'll start with Eagles, because this is what I love to play for 8 seasons. I invested fully in it. I made these marches as strong as they can, and they just started getting outclassed. Now, why is that? The main reason Eagles don't work well anymore is there's just not enough hero support. And that takes two forms. First, there's just not enough flying heroes. And second, of the flying heroes, just not enough of them support the Cav gameplay. Now, I have Ferandal pulled up here. He is the best flying Cav commander by far, and it's no surprise Eagles hit their peak during Season 3 when this guy was released, right? Everything he does works well with flying Cav. His artifact works well with him. He has a good pet, the Berserk Phaedrake. You can see I've built it out like to the 9s here. Ferandal's great for flying Cav. After Ferandal, you only have 6 more flying heroes in total in the entire game. So at best, you can put out 3 full marches. And then honestly, the biggest add we've got, to the Cav march since Ferandal is Bayhorn, all right? And he's okay, but he's not amazing. So we've got 3 flying marches with compromised heroes, right? By comparison, if we're in the ground Cav game, you can easily put out 5 full marches with good heroes that work with ground Cav that are all performing like at or better than any of your heroes. So you're just so outclassed by the ground Cav at this point in the game. The other thing with this is in Season 3, your lower spenders, your mid spenders, they didn't have the troops to put out a 5-march Cav ball, and so your 2 to 3 flying marches, they were very powerful. We're heading into Season 13 now. Everyone's got 1 million troops or more. Even mid-spenders can easily put out that 5-march Cav ball. I don't care how good your 3 marches are. When you're meeting a 5-march Cav ball against you, you're just going to lose. They have more troops, more artifacts, more pets. You're going to be outclassed, and even me, who had these flying marches, essentially maxed out, even if I had equal numbers, I was typically outclassed against a strong Cav player, and I'm certainly heavily outclassed when I'm facing, a 5-march Cav ball. And so these things just can't perform on the battlefield like they used to do. Now, do they still have some uses? Sure. Use them to hunt down, isolated or retreating enemy, marksmen, enemy mages. Maybe an enemy mage was fighting on the front line and they was sent home AFK. You can kill that march. Okay, great. But these flying marches, they just can't perform at the same level that the ground Cav can perform right now. Okay, so that's option 1. Use your Eagles as a flying march. Issue with that is we just don't have enough commanders and enough good commanders to support that. Okay, option number 2 is you can just put these guys on the ground. Much like a League of Order player will use their Celestials mostly as another ground mage march, you can use your Eagles as another ground Cav march. Okay, why doesn't that work? Well, the reason is Eagles are inferior to ground Cav. All right, you don't want to compare these guys to Elk Riders because they're doing different things. But let's compare them to the League of Order or the Wilderburg Cav, and you can see they're substantially weaker. So if you're choosing a faction to go into and you want to be a high-end Cav player, why would you choose Springwardens and handicap yourself? Choose the factions that have the better Cav, which is Wilderburg, and then League of Order is almost as good, and then you have a huge drop-off to get to the Springwardens. So this is the reason why you don't really use these as ground Cav if you want to be a Cav main. Okay, now our last option is the Elk Riders. And the Elk Riders is really where the game missed its biggest opportunity, I think. Elk Riders just perform differently than other Cav. They're sort of a hybrid between a traditional Cav march and an archer march. Elk Riders attack from mid-range, which is sort of halfway between melee range, and normal archer range. And they did get a buff, I don't know, 5 or 6 seasons ago. They got the Wild Barrage effect. Okay, that's nice. Elk Riders really have a couple niche uses. They're sort of like supposed to be a hidden run unit. They're better against enemy infantry than traditional Cav. If you want to city hop with Cav, you want to do it with Elk Riders. And then, like, when it comes to enemy keeps, there is literally no marks you can put in a keep that if you're AFK, you won't get farmed by Elk Riders. I don't care if you have a fully awakened exemplar artifact, 8-slot pet with everything maxed out, Mags A marching that keep. If I have a good, later generation Elk Rider Cav march, I'll come up and farm you, all right? This is why I always tell players, never leave your troops AFK in the keep. Now, having said that, these guys are outclassed on the battlefield by traditional Cav. What is the biggest counter to Elk Riders? It's normal Cav, right? Because as a ranged unit, if you charge your Wolf Riders, if you charge your human cavalry into the Elk Riders, they'll get the unyielding rush buff and an instant rage bar. So in a Cav on Cav fight, Elk Riders get slaughtered by human and orc Cav. The other thing that I've found is when they come out with new Cav heroes or new Cav artifacts, they don't design them with the Elk Riders in mind. I think the best example I can give you of this is the seasonal talents. All right, like let's remember a couple KVKs ago, if you played the Winter is Upon Us scenario, you got these seasonal talents and basically you can go down these various trees here. And at the end of the tree, there are different buffs for different types of troops. For example, archers got long-range warfare. Your traditional ground Cav, they got a buff to unyielding rush. What did Elk Riders get? They didn't get anything, all right? Elk Rider range did not change if you got the long-range warfare buff. Elk Riders don't have unyielding rush, so they didn't get that buff. So if you're an Elk Rider player, what are you looking forward to in your seasonal talents? Literally nothing. The game designers do not care about Elk Riders. These are just forgotten troops. Okay, so how do you fix the problem? Really, the solutions fall into 2 buckets. Bucket 1 is easy, but not that good. Bucket 2 is good, but not that easy. So let's talk about the easy button solutions first. The first and easiest solution would just be to transform Elk Riders into standard melee-based Cav. The same as Knights, the same as Wolf Riders, the exact same stats, the exact same abilities. This would essentially put the Springwardens on par with Wilderburg, right? Whereas Wilderburg have the very strong archers and then weaker flying troops. The Springwardens would have the same thing, right? The good ground Cav and then the weaker flying variety. All right, if you did this, I'd come back and play Springwardens again because I could play a lot of ground Cav and go to flying Cav when I wanted to. That'd be really fun for me. Now, what's the downside to this? It kind of makes the factions more uniform. It makes the factions don't have a ton of differences anyway, and this would eliminate one of the major differences. And so the faction choice, which should be meaningful, would become even less so. So I don't love that. The other thing is some players do like Elk Riders, so if you were going to do this, it would be better if you sort of gave Elven players an option. Do you want Elk Riders or do you want traditional Cav? Choose one but not both, all right? And maybe you make it like 10,000 gems to every time you want to change between Elk Riders and your traditional ground Cav, whatever you want to call it. Solution number 2 is to buff Forest Eagles in such a way that they're on par with ground Cav. And so if I wanted to play the Elves as a ground Cav-based faction, I am not disincentivized to do so because the Forest Eagles are weaker. Now, you could do this and just straight buff them and give them equal stats to Wolf Riders to Knights. That would work. The other thing that would be slightly more complex is you could keep their stats the same as they are now when they're flying, but when they're in a ground march, you make them equal to Wolf Riders and Knights. I know some people will say if you buff Eagles to have equal stats to Knights and Wolf Riders, when they're flying, they'll be overpowered. I don't think that's an issue. Eagles in the game right now are a little more than a nuisance, and even if you gave them that buff, that's not going to change. However, if you want to keep them weak in the air, do a little additional work and just make them stronger when they're on the ground. Those were the solutions that were easy but not good. What are the good solutions not that easy? All right, the first one is give us more flying heroes. I think this would be good in general. Like I'm saying, I would love to see more flying mages, more flying archers as well. Flying's a dimension this game has that's really underutilized. And I think it would be a really, give us some potentially interesting gameplay, some unique moments, if we could put out a lot of truly flying legions out there that might change the course of a battle, change the course of a war. Right now, that just doesn't happen very much. So let's have some more flying heroes in the game, and in particular, flying cav heroes who support the Eagle Play game style. Now, as you design these heroes, you've got to keep it balanced. And I do support the sort of, if you will, the flying tax that gets put on. For example, let's take a look at Ferondil here. His rage skill does 1200 damage factor, and it gives a debuff too, obviously. 1200 damage factor for a cav commander is pretty low. You look at even like the G1 cav heroes, Emrys here, his damage factor is 1500, right? But I'm okay with that because you put a little tax on Ferondil here because he can fly. And of course, when you have things like seasonal talents or effects that extend in a particular season, please keep the elf riders in mind when you do this. For example, long-range warfare, while it moves archers to mage range, what if it moved elk riders to traditional archer range? That seems like it'd be a pretty good buff to me and not at all overpowered. When you give a seasonal buff to Unyielding Rush, do something for elk riders just to make their barrage skill a little bit better, all right? When you design these seasonal talents, don't forget that you have a Springwarden faction that some of these buffs don't even apply to. And so those are my suggestions for fixing the Springwarden faction. The easy way to do it would just be to give the elves the traditional ground cav, or buff their flying cav to be on par with that traditional ground cav. The more complicated way to do it would be to introduce a number of additional flying heroes in the game that would allow the flying cav gameplay to at least match the ground cav gameplay in terms of the overall number of legions that they can send to the battle. You don't want to make the flying cav equally strong as the ground cav, right? The flying cav have to pay a tax for the fact that they fly, right? That additional maneuverability. But at the same time, you don't want flying cav players having to resort to sending out Bertrand to support their flying marches. Their cav commander should at least be decent, not the trash that they have to send out right now. All right, elk riders, they're closer to being good, but we need to take more into account how they perform and not design new features with forgetting that they exist completely. In particular, the seasonal talents, when they're buffing their traditional cav, they should be buffing elk riders, maybe extending their range when you're giving archers long-range warfare, or maybe give them some buff to barrage when you're giving the ground cav that unyielding rush buff. Okay, one last thing before I head out. In my previous video, I asked a question. Basically, if you're sending a new gatherer into the Alliance RSS well, who's the best deputy to send with the gathering hero? I was hoping I could trick some of you into saying, hey, another gathering hero to get those skills off, but most of your gathering skills are now holistic, which means all of your marches, regardless of who the commanders are, get the benefit. The answer, of course, is you want to send Flint to your Alliance RSS well, if Flint's awakened, because that fifth skill will give you a 10% bonus when you're done gathering. When Flint first came out, he either was not giving that 10% for Alliance RSS centers, or maybe it was a tooltip bug. In the couple weeks he's been out, they fixed that bug, and now he clearly gets that 10% when you put him into that Alliance RSS center. So Flint is the answer here. You all got it right. Good job. All right, and hey, that's all I got for you today. Until next time, you stay classy, Belleron.